Good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate y'all coming to visit. My name is Fielding Freed. I'm Director of House Museums for Historic Columbia. Today's presentation is going to be about decorating for the holidays in the 19th century. We're going to talk pretty much about the whole 100-year time span, and we're doing so in the Hampton Preston Mansion. We're starting out in the large object storage room. We're going to go to a couple more rooms as part of this behind-the-scenes tour while we're talking about the holidays or holy days. Typically during the 19th century, the holiday season started with Christmas and then went all the way into New Year's. New Year's was a very big deal, a big part of the celebrations, so that'll be mentioned as well. But of course, Christmas being the religious holiday today, just as it was back then, is where we'll begin. One of the things that is interesting about decorating in the 19th century is that we have a lot of the same traditions still in effect today. It's been one of those things about human cultures across time and across continents that folks like to bring in vegetation of different sorts into their homes or other dwellings as part of celebrating a special time of the year. Christmas is no different than that. As it takes place during the wintertime, what folks would do, just like we do today, is go look for things that are still green, have their leaves on, so evergreens such as pine, boxwood, magnolia, and lots of others here in the southeast were the plant materials that they would pick to use to decorate. Again, just as we do today. It's been interesting. I've noticed that boxwood was a very important, not only landscaping plant in the 19th century, but also decorating. And boxwood has really come back strong. A lot of boxwood wreaths over the past 10 years I've noticed as a design trend. One of the other things that's kind of obvious in hindsight about foliage used to decorate in the 19th century are the colors. Of course, they're going for green because it is wintertime, and then the red of hollyberries. This is the plant that really sets up the color scheme for Christmas, and also Santa Claus's color choices as well. We'd be remiss if, as South Carolinians, we didn't talk about this very important red and green plant, the poinsettia, named after Joel Poinsett, who, by the way, of course, as I'm sure y'all know, was a South Carolinian and discovers this plant while ambassador to Mexico in the 1820s. Knowing that in the wintertime we like things that are green and red, he sees it, he says, well, this will be a great plant to take back to the States. He does so, and by 1833 we have our first reference where it's being sold during the holidays in Philadelphia. Long history with this plant that really has become part of our Christmas vernacular decoration. The other big piece of vegetation that we use to decorate in the holidays is, of course, the Christmas tree. We have a model of one that is a tabletop, and this was how Christmas trees first started, brought over initially by German immigrants. The Germans have been using Christmas trees, Tannenbaum, for a long time before they became popular here. It takes until about the 1860s before Christmas trees really start to take hold and be part of American culture in general. They did decorate Christmas trees. One of the things that they would do that was very popular for kids was oftentimes parents on Christmas Eve would come down, decorate the tree with candle holders like this, and then affix candles that would be lit. Beautiful sight, extremely dangerous, especially in regards to the Historic House Museum. That's why I don't have any candles here. One of the apocryphal tales is that people would always have a bucket of water nearby just in case that tree caught fire. They did also begin in the 19th century using things that are very familiar today, and that's glass ornaments. Again, imported from Germany, really in earnest beginning 1870s, 1880s. The first electric lights go on Christmas trees by the late 1880s, believe it or not. Seems kind of early to me, but about 1889 we have those. One of the other things about a Christmas tree like this is it's easily portable. You can move it around from room to room if you want. They've been making a comeback. Apartment dwellers, condo dwellers, and folks that just don't necessarily have room for a big tree, tabletops are back in style. One of the other things about South Carolinians during the 19th century that's interesting to me is how they like to celebrate the holy days with noise. Fireworks, firecrackers, very much used during Christmas and New Year's. it's one of those things where there's still states where fireworks are illegal, and as people pass through South Carolina, I know that there's a lot of fireworks stands, and people like to buy these during the holidays as well. So this one was the type that would be nailed to a tree, and then when it was lit, it would spin around. So they had lots of different types of fireworks, not just firecrackers during the 19th century. As we move forward in time, you start to see a transition from strictly a religious holiday to one where we get this great St. Nicholas involved, and he is giving gifts to children. And one of the first ways that gifts are given to kids are good old hand-woven wool socks that they would hang by the fireplace, and then that would have a lot of toys and candies. We'll talk more about that. But candy, sweets, that's one of the main things that folks appreciated and really wanted during the 19th century. Initially, gifts are pretty simple, simply wrapped, oftentimes something handmade, although we do see very early on advertisements in newspapers here in Columbia and other South Carolina towns where specifically merchants are getting things in for the Christmas season to sell as gifts. I spoke about newspapers. There's also another really neat way that we learn about Christmases of the past, and we're going to move ourselves here and we'll go into the hallway. Where we're going to have a look at one of my favorite artifacts in our collection. This is a Harpers Weekly magazine, extremely popular during its run during the 19th century. It covered all sorts of topics, and it was one of those publications that most every family subscribed to. What you're looking at is the edition from December of 1860, where we have every element of a modern Christmas in place by this time. You'll notice the big center focus, though, is the Christmas dinner. That was really when they had their Thanksgiving meal. It was their Christmas dinner was the big one. As you can see, the tablecloth's really well laid out, and the families gather around. And that was the important social and family part of the holidays and Christmas. As you work your way around the illustration, there are different Christmas activities that are shown. The Christmas tree that I mentioned before, again, by the 1860s, would have been a popular thing for folks of most means, and it would have been something that would have been very common and familiar. There's a young woman hanging up stockings. While it doesn't get necessarily cold enough for the Congaree River to freeze over here in Columbia, ice skating in other parts of the country has always been a very popular wintertime activity. In the lower right section, it says Poor Man's Christmas. And that shows a family without much means, basically not having anything to celebrate Christmas with. And that was a reminder, obviously, of the editors of Harpers that not everybody has it good sometimes during the holidays, and that's an appropriate time for us to reach out to those who don't and help them. Moving on up, you see a familiar face there, even if he's dressed a little differently than what we're used to. That is St. Nicholas, Santa Claus. And he looks a little bit more like a garden gnome, but he is wearing the fashions of the time. One of the cool things about Santa is he does change and his fashions evolve over time. And in that one, I love this hat that he's wearing, a little conical hat. And then moving on up, you'll notice that Christmas dances have always been extremely popular social events. Not so much this year, unfortunately, but that is something that was really just an integral part of the holidays during the 1860s. While I've got you here, we're going to move on over to one other collections room. But I did want to pause for a minute. If there are folks who haven't been to the Hampton Preston before, we just celebrated our 200th anniversary in 2018. The house had a major rehabilitation, both interpretation and then also some of the physical aspects of it. And this central hallway is just really something spectacular. When you look at the cantilevered staircase, it's only supported on one side, and this amazing view down to the hand-painted canvas floor cloth, which was a typical stair hall floor covering of the 18th and 19th century. The craftsmanship involved and the skill of the enslaved carpenters who built this house is definitely evidenced here. One of the other really neat things that we did during this was replicate the original faux finishings that were on these walls. It was painted and scored to look like block, like stonework, but it's not. It's just a plaster wall behind there. The team that did it went so far as to put sand on it when it was wet to give it that block appearance. Very well done, wonderful rehabilitation. Can't wait till y'all can come see us in person and see it firsthand. Come on in and welcome. I'm going to turn a little bit more light on for us. This is the small objects collections storage area. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But carrying on that segue from who actually built this house, the enslaved African American carpenters, during the holidays in the antebellum period, we need to always keep in mind something very important and critical, is that it was enslaved African Americans who were providing the labor with which for a family to potentially buy this food, but also they were the ones providing the labor to cook it and also do things like polish anything that was going to be used during the holiday time period. If it was supposed to be shiny, everything got polished this time of year, whether that be a brass candlestick or copper cooking pot or a silver punch cup like we've got here. Speaking of punch, very, very important social lubricant, and punches were very popular during this time period, all different types. One of the ones that maintains its presence in our culture today is eggnog, which got started during the 18th and 19th century. And then we have a bottle of Madeira, which was one of the most popular wines for South Carolinians, made on an island off the coast of Portugal. Madeira had a unique, I said past tense, but it's still being made. It has a unique property that it can really withstand a lot of heat, rough treatment. So it was really made, it's a fortified wine, so it travels very well, ages very well, and was one of the more popular forms of wine here in South Carolina. At some point, it can even be used as currency. Oftentimes, if there was, especially during the Civil War, oftentimes people would pay or trade the Madeira. Food, I mentioned that before earlier, talking about the Harpers Weekly. This Christmas was when you had your turkey, your goose, your large side of beef, and it was also a chance for cooks to show off their skills, whether that be in baked goods, gingerbread cookies, gingerbread proper being very popular then, still popular today, to anything like a stuffed lemon. I can't say I've ever had one of those, but certainly looks good. And we have a wonderful collection of faux food. Since obviously we can't bring real food into our house museums because that's going to attract a lot of bugs, we have a great quantity of faux food that, if I'm hungry, can actually get my mouth watering, even though I know it's plastic and hollow. One of the things that I've found as I've learned about cooking in menus during the holidays of the 19th century, very prevalent use of molds for savory and sweets. An aspic, for example, a tomato aspic that a lot of people still make, would be a carryover from this time period where they're mixing whatever filling with gelatin, and then it solidifies. You put it in the mold, and then it gives you this neat, almost architectural, if you can see those details, appearance. And this is a way that they could rather cheaply really dress a table up, and it also makes certain ingredients go further because you're able to break them down and put them in a mold. The pie is important because while there was always been popular in our culture, apple pies and our other sweet pies, keep in mind during this time period, savory pies are probably being made about at the same rate. Savory pies were something that was served during the week as well. It was one of those things that can be made in the wintertime and be left out for a couple of days and still be good to eat. Now, we're in a room full of artifacts, so I thought it'd be kind of fun to see if anybody knows what this implement is. It definitely would have been used this time of year. Well, it looks like some sort of terrible dental extractor. It's actually made to specifically cut into sugar cones. This was how sugar was shipped during the 18th and usually mid-19th century. And this is a way that you could cut off a certain piece to add to your recipe. And The reason why is they would have, rows of these molds. As they're refining the sugar cane, they're pouring it into these conical molds, letting that dry. Then they take it out, and blue paper, for whatever reason, was the traditional color for wrapping sugar. There may be a reason. Somebody there in the group might even know. I haven't been able to find a good source to tell me what was significant about blue paper, but that was always what they wrapped sugar in. And then, of course, you're going to the grocer, and you're not getting things in McCormick tins. You're getting large sections of things like this, the cinnamon bark. We often forget that's exactly what it is. It's bark from a tree. If you had to pick 3 spices, if you will, for the holidays of the 19th century, it's going to be cinnamon, sugar, and nutmeg. Those were the main 3. While it would have been very common for just about anybody to have access to apples and pears, and of course we're just coming off the growing season, those would have been used in pies. They also would have been used in preserves. More wealthy Colombians were able to have access to more exotic things like a pineapple and coconut. Those are very, very popular. There's an old misunderstanding that pineapples in the 18th century, beginning in the 18th century, were symbols of welcome. And while that is true today, the pineapple has morphed and evolved into becoming a symbol of welcome. You'll see, concrete pineapples on people's gates, if they have a masonry gate, for example, or just, as a symbol in your house. Prior to that, it was really the pine cone, which was the symbol for the ancient Greek and Romans as a symbol of welcome. Again, one of those evergreen plants. But again, it would have been something that would have been a very expensive thing and nice to have on a holiday occasion. Growing up, we're back to the sock hung by the chimney with care. Growing up, I remember we would get oftentimes an orange or an apple in our Christmas stocking, and I was always a little underwhelmed and didn't understand why. And I do remember asking my mom when I was about 12 or 13, why do we get these things in our stocking? She said, well, that's what we always got. And that is a 19th century tradition because, again, keep in mind that citrus products, while we can grow things like Myers lemons here in South Carolina, other things like a really nice big navel orange, that would have been a luxury item, especially for kids. So this was something that was very traditional, given to children. And then kind of bridging the gap between sugar and fruit, we have this topiary that would have been the centerpiece, or maybe 2 of them made to put on a table for the holidays, where it's sugared fruit, basically an edible arrangement. I think there's a company that does that now. So that's one of those ideas that goes back to the 19th century. A minute ago, we talked about the Harpers Weekly as one of our sources on how we know how people celebrated Christmas during the 19th century. There are other sources. We have letters, we have journals, we have wonderful things like these cookbooks. This is a wonderful example of how English foodways, British foodways, still influenced American foodways well into the 19th century. This is a book that was published in England, 1 shilling, there you go. And yet it was a very popular one here for American chefs and cooks. It gives you a step-by-step instruction on how to cook such things as hare, H-A-R-E, and other dishes that today might get our attention if they were served with their heads still on. That's not necessarily something we do anymore, but it does really show you how, in the 19th century, they were not afraid of showing where their food came from. Other books like this, very interesting, The Complete Housewife, comes from the 18th century. I'm only going to open it so far. This was an exceedingly popular book. There's a gentleman named John Townsend who does a great 18th century cooking show on YouTube, and he has cooked a couple of these recipes from this. Fascinating to watch. He uses hearths, he uses open fire cooking to really show you how they did things back in the 18th and 19th century. But it's books like this that again help inform how we pick our faux food, how we make our faux food, and then put it out on the table downstairs during the holidays to try to replicate at least kind of the look, if you will, of what a table would look like during Christmas of the 1860s. Here's something that is an amazing document, primary document for us, and I'm going to open it very carefully and gingerly. And this was a Christmas present, and we know it was because it says so right on it. It's amazing as a curator when you get an object like this that has the provenance written in it. So I think it's B. McMaster, got this from her father on December 25th of 1868. So what is it? Ostensibly it was an empty book, and she came through as a young lady and cut out things that caught her fancy out of magazines, things like Harpers, and then pasted them in here to make a scrapbook. She has some autographs, some poems, lots of biblical quotes, and this gives us a real insight into this young person's mind during this time period. That is one of the things about Harpers that's kind of interesting. Oftentimes those got cut up and put in scrapbooks and recycled in other ways. So we're really fortunate to have the ones that we do in our collection. Speaking of collection, as you look around this room, I'm going to step a little bit out of the frame. This is our small object storage area. The majority of our objects are on exhibit. Sister institutions like the McKissick Museum or the South Carolina State Museum have large rooms and sections where they have this type of storage. But because the majority of ours are actually out on the floor, we do have 2 rooms where we have things in storage. So what you're going to see when you come into this area is archival boxes, wire shelving. What we try to do is create a very buffered environment so that the objects don't get too hot. Getting cold doesn't hurt them necessarily, but don't get too hot or too humid or too much light. To that end, it depends on what we're talking about. If it's a metal object like these down here, they're fine being out. In fact, that's a good way for us to keep an eye on things and make sure they're not oxidizing any more than the others. And as you move up these storage shelves, you'll see some heavier things like we have books and boxes. And then we were talking about toys. We have a lot of children's toys, doll gear that would have been given during Christmas to young women. And then at the very tip top, we have some basketry. On the other rack, we have primarily textiles, quilts. We have rolled rugs. What we do is we put those on acid-free tubes and then roll them in acid-free tissue and then wrap them with unbleached muslin, and that gives us a nice buffer. And we'll come in every now and then and kind of move those around and roll them around a little bit. We used to have a lot of our collection of quilts rolled, but we had some quilt experts come in and they persuaded us that it's better to fold them. It's just what you have to be careful of when you fold them is not creating permanent creases in them, so we pad those out with acid-free paper. To my left here, an art rack. While a lot of the artwork has been removed from these frames and stored flat files, there are some that still remain in here. And just because we're having a behind-the-scenes tour and this is kind of cool and we don't usually do this, this is how we keep track of everything. We have a computer database. And as you can probably figure out, 1998 was the year this came into our collection. We accessioned it then. This is the 226th accession. That's our formal taking it into collection, saying we're going to be the stewards of this object, making a commitment to it. And then that's the first object within number 226. So there were at least 226 times that we did all the paperwork. Each object gets incoming condition report. It's photographed. It's measured. If there are any issues with it, those are sketched out and remarked, and then all that goes into a computer database and a backup paper file. You'll notice this one has an X on it. There are some things in our collections that we don't know where they came from. It's the same with any institution I've worked at. There's always, especially when institutions first get started, the paperwork level was different than it is today. So we are stewards of this object, but we don't have maybe the deed of gift. So we have to take care of it, but it's not fully in our collection. The textile rack, we have a lot of different textiles, a lot of small things like handkerchief, doilies, that sort of thing. But we also have some really unique textiles such as Mary Boykin's Chestnut Dress, which is on exhibit over at the Robert Mills house. And you'll see as you go all the way up, we have a Tyvek over the top over all these so that in case of a bad storm, we can drop that down and make sure that everything's safe. Or if, we had construction work done in the house, so we dropped them down to keep dust off. So getting back to Christmas, this is the environment that we want to make sure that Miss McMaster's journal, her scrapbook is kept in, so we keep it for as many generations as possible. If you want to replicate a 19th century kind of feel for your decorations, here's a few things to keep in mind. By and large, any type of greenery that's natural, to this area can be used both on your table, in your wreath, or in spirals of garlands going up your handrails. Usually entrances into houses or where they were decorating. There, you would be perfectly acceptable to have a pie of any type, savory and or sweet. There's a lot of great savory pie recipes out there I highly suggest. There's one that's an onion pie that John Townsend does. It's surprisingly good, even if you don't like onions. Some people do like this one. Turkey. Christmas was the time you had your big turkey, your goose. Last but not least, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the very British tradition of plum pudding, which was very labor-intensive dessert to make, which is probably why it's fallen out of fashion, but it's a real showstopper when you are able to make that. Our very own John Shearer, Director of Cultural Resources, made that faux plum pudding, and it looks pretty good. He did a great job. The other thing is punches. Again, they don't have to be alcoholic. There's plenty of other drinks, punches out there that you can make. And for those that are interested, we will be having a History Happy Hour coming up, I believe in a week or so. 17th. On the 17th? Thank you. On December 17th, where we're going to be looking closely at rums and then also Madeira and other holiday beverages of this time period. We'll be sending out recipes ahead of time so that you can make it and we can all participate together. Thank you for inviting us to be part of your holidays this year. You're a great group. I've enjoyed speaking with y'all before, and I'm sorry. Hello, Jeanette. I'm sorry I can't be there to see everybody in person, but we appreciate everything you do to support Historic Columbia. Today is Giving Tuesday, but any day after that, we always welcome. We are a membership organization, and your support helps us keep preserving these artifacts, these stories, and these buildings in the manner with which we try to do our very best to do. So thank you all very much. Great to see you again. Hope to see you soon.